And so today we're going to put another piece of our puzzle of our life's understanding together. And I find that when I find a piece of my puzzle, my life's puzzle, that wow, I understand, and things make more sense. And so that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to ask you, who of you has seen the chaos going on in the colleges and universities this week? All right, okay, just Teresa's clueless. Okay, the young people have gone mad in the colleges and the universities at Yale and Harvard and all this over Israel. And they're protesting, the schools have had to be shut down, there's violence, they're camping out, they're setting up tents and calling it, something zones. Anyway, these are Palestinian protesters, okay, they're against Israel. The Jewish students are threatened, okay? They feel their lives are threatened, and they are, okay? Because a bunch of them got arrested at Yale, and now this is just spilling over into all the other universities. So this is why we need to know what's going on. The Bible says that we're to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and this is why, okay? Because listen, if you're Jewish, you're a target. Okay, you're a target in the United States if you're Jewish. Okay, and so, well, I'm not Jewish, so I don't have anything to worry about. That's the wrong attitude. These are God's people. These are God's chosen people. He chose them. They have a purpose to fulfill in prophecy. They are going to end up being the greatest evangelists that have ever lived. Okay, they're going to make Billy Graham look like an idiot. Okay, because God has chosen them. And he's going to use them. That 144,000 Jews that he's going to save in the end times, those are going to be the greatest evangelists that have ever been on the face of the earth. And they're all Jewish. So we need to have an attitude of thankfulness and reverence towards those people, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem every day. And pray that these kids' eyes will be opened.
Yeah.
You know what? They haven't lived life long enough to know squat. And they're out there, demanding, stuff that they know nothing about.
Yeah.
So we need to pray for them. So we're going to start looking at the word today, anti-Semitism. We all hear that. We all know what it means. Okay, but where did it come from? And why did it come to mean hatred for the Jews? And this term was first used by a German journalist named Wilhelm Marr in 1870. And he used that word to describe hatred or hostility towards Jews. So the story very much reminds me of the Exodus. And when I go through this, I want you to really think about, okay, what in the Bible does this remind you of? And I want you to start looking for patterns, because we're going to start seeing patterns that are going to unfold. All right, and so what this reminded me of was the Exodus and the growth of the Jewish population in Egypt during that 400 years that they were exiled to Egypt. Now, they were slaves, but notice how they still prospered. Okay, the Bible says they prospered as a nation even though they were slaves. And this is exactly what happened throughout the ages. And just like Solomon said, there is nothing new under the sun, because this exact same scenario keeps repeating itself and will continue to repeat itself until Jesus comes back. And it just gets played out over and over again, and it's got the same root issue, which we're going to talk about, and we need to get to the root of all issues. Because until you get to the root of it, you can't understand what the issue is. And so to me, I was thinking, why does everybody hate the Jews? What have they done to anybody, And so this is where this teaching came from, is my own thoughts on why people hate the Jews so much. So this root, as we know it, it begins with the word anti. All right, well, we know what anti means, right? It means false. And then Semitism. All right, so Semitism has to be broken down to get to the root word, which is Semite. All right, so who was a Semite? Well, a Semite comes from Shem, the son of Noah. All right, so it is believed that, of course, Noah had 3 sons, and so if you're wondering why the Jews are assumed to be from Shem, here's the reason. Because it's believed that Ham and his ancestors are the black people. All right? And then it is believed that Shem and his ancestors are the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, and that Japheth was the daughter of the Medes, the Persians, the Greeks, and the other people. All right. I'm not saying that's true or not true. I don't know. Okay? All right. But anyway, that's just where that comes from. So anti-Semite means false Shem. Comes from Shem. False, you know. And so the Germans thought that any race other than the Aryan race was inferior. So the Germans tried to wipe out all the descendants of Shem, okay, because they were from Japheth. And so they didn't like anybody who wasn't from a descendant of Japheth, you know, so to speak. And so, so what they did was, and we all know, you know, I lost my place. They all know, we all know what Hitler did and everything, and we're going to talk about that just a little bit. But so this anti-Semitism was coined in 1870, but this motivation goes back to the beginning. It goes back, honestly, to Exodus. And do you know it has actually been debated for the Jews to pay restitution back to Egypt for all the money that they took when they left Egypt?
Really?
Yeah, just like it's still talked about today about paying, it still comes up about paying the black people today for the slavery, you know, way back when. All right, so anyway, so this is where this motivation comes from. So if we look at this, the root of it, okay, and then we're going to get into replacement theology, because that replacement theology comes from this root of getting rid of Shem. Okay, and we're going to talk about that. All right, but to start with, we got to go back to ancient Rome and Greece. And prior to this, you know that common sense tells you that all the Canaanites hated the Jews, right? And we know, we did that study, we know the Canaanites lived in the land. There were a lot of giants. Satan infiltrated the land because he knew that God had given it to Abraham. So he sends all this corruption, these giants, everything to keep the people of God from entering the land. So yes, there's a lot of hatred there. And then they go to Egypt, where they end up slaves, and yet they prosper in number, and then they prove to be a threat to the Egyptians. At least that's how Pharaoh saw them. And then throughout the subsequent years, Israel was conquered by various people, and if you read your Bible at all, you know it's just one battle after another. And so when we go through this, we got to keep in mind that they had a call from Abraham. God said, this is your land. This is where you are going to make a people. You are going to be a great nation in this land right here. So what does Satan do? He is doing it today. He's just still coming against these Jewish people, coming against God's people to thwart God's plan. He knows that Jesus is coming back to rule and reign in Jerusalem. So he's doing everything he can to destroy the people and that land. So the Bible tells us in Kings, it tells us of the conquest of King Nebuchadnezzar and the destruction of Solomon's temple, and how the people had been taken as slaves into Babylon. They were either taken as slaves, dispersed, or killed. All right, and so now we're going to jump ahead and look at Greece, and because Greece, you know, Egypt was the world, you know, leader. Then Greece became the world leader, and then Rome. All right, so let's look at Greece. So under Alexander the Great of Macedonia, he conquered Syria and Egypt as well as Jerusalem from the Persian Empire, and we know about this because Daniel talks about it. And Daniel was given this information, and he records it in Daniel 11:3. So Alexander the Great, he spread the culture of Greece while allowing the people of various religions to continue worshiping their gods. So he didn't really force them to worship the Greek gods. He let them continue on in their own, whatever their own choice of worship was. And so he didn't want to, he didn't really want to cause any trouble with them like that. He just wanted to be at peace with them these lands that he conquered, and as long as they kept their supply lines open and didn't give him any problems, then he was fine. All right, but at 33, Alexander the Great died. And then his kingdom, just as Daniel prophesied, his kingdom was divided amongst his 4 generals. And Daniel tells all about this. And so you have the Seleucid or Syrian Greek Empire now, and then a century later you have Antiochus Epiphanes, and he was known as the most notoriously forgotten villain. So you see, as you know, as somebody dies and somebody replaces them, here we go again. You know, and it's just history repeating itself. So this was during a time between the return of the Jewish exiles and the rise of the Roman Empire. And so when Alexander the Great died and it's divided into 4, well, now it doesn't have as much power. All right, now Rome is rising up. All right, so now Rome eventually is going to exceed, Greece, and now the Romans are going to conquer the land of Israel. And so, but while we're in this interim period, the land of Judea at this time was caught between 2 of the generals left by Alexander the Great. And that's the Seleucid kingdom of Syria in the north, and I can't ever remember how to pronounce that word, Ptolemaic. I never say that right. Egypt in the south. So Daniel 11 talks about this thing right here. He talks about when this is going to happen, and these two generals in these 2 territories are going to fight over this land. Throughout most of this time, Judea was left alone. All right, and until this rise of Antiochus Epiphanes, and now trouble starts. And Antiochus Epiphanes' plan was different than Alexander the Great's plan. And he wanted to colonize Judea. He wanted to cause the Jewish people to worship the Greek gods. Okay, so now you can see trouble brewing, right? And he wanted them to embrace the Greek Hellenistic way of life and worship all the Greek pantheons, and especially Zeus. And so he even built a temple in Jerusalem to Zeus. Now, you can imagine the Jews didn't go for this. Okay? And so now things are starting to really go south. All right, now somewhere around 170 BC, and you've heard the stories of Antiochus arriving in Jerusalem to find the people in an open state of revolt against him. And he took control of this situation by slaying many innocent Jewish lives, and then of course he used brutality in enforcing his cultural and religious practices. So you see how it's declining. Now they're using brute force. Now they're forcing them to worship the Greek gods and everything. And so he literally stopped all the Jewish practices that had been handed down by God to Abraham. It was against the law to circumcise. They burned the scriptures. They desecrated the Temple Mount. He put up a citadel on the Temple Mount next to the temple. He didn't tear down the temple, but he put a citadel right next to it. And then in the temple, they would place idols in the temple. They would sacrifice pigs on the holy altar to Zeus. And this was interesting. I thought public nakedness was forbidden by the Jews. And yet the Greeks' idea of masculinity, and that's why you see all these naked Greek statues and stuff, it was, they were shown, if you were a real man, you'd be naked, right? And they would, when they went into the gymnasium or they did their games or whatever, that was a part of their masculinity, to be naked. Okay, and that was totally against the Jews. So what they did was they made it a law where the Jews, if they had to go to the gymnasium once a year, and they had to go naked. Well, so they deliberately did things to provoke them. All right. And so then you got the statues of the Greek gods. They were put all over Judea, and if someone wouldn't worship them, they would just kill them. All right. And so Antiochus Epiphanes, he's really the precursor or the archetype of the little horn that Daniel talked about, who is the Antichrist. And Hitler was too. So we see all these people who are Antichrist, who are precursors to the one that's finally going to be it. So it wasn't until the Jews revolted that things really got bad, okay? And so it resulted in the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, and a dispersion of the people, and the persecution of those that remained, all right? And after this, there was another revolt that further caused great harm to the Jewish people, resulting in murder, disbursement, or they were sold into slavery. So now they don't have a temple. And so with no temple came a transformation in the Jewish religion, and they didn't have a temple to go to, so now they had all these synagogues in farther away places. So now they really began worshiping at the synagogues. And now they're no longer a viable nation, okay, really, because they've just been squashed. And a lot of them have been dispersed. And so I'm, of course, skipping a ton, but I want you to start seeing this pattern that's going to start emerging. That God directed them to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Why? Because they're constantly under attack. All right? And there has never been peace in Jerusalem other than the short time that Jesus lived. That was the only time. So now we're going to go to advance in history to 63 BC, when Rome, under Pompey the Great, he invades Jerusalem. All right, so now we got rid of the Greeks. Okay, now we're up to the Roman Empire. Now they've taken over. And now Rome is the most powerful nation on earth. They're conquering much of the known world. Rome is, in Daniel's vision of the statue, they're the iron in the feet. Okay, so that's iron. Rome was during the Iron Age, and so Rome conquered, a lot of land. They initially they didn't strip anybody of their religious practices. Initially, they let everybody just practice whatever religion they wanted to, just like initially Greece did. But that changed, and then eventually they began to force their religious ways on everybody that they captured. So in 66 AD, the Jews rebelled against Rome. And remember how the disciples wanted Jesus to set up his kingdom? Why? He wanted them they wanted Jesus to overthrow Rome. Okay, and that was a big deal. Okay, and they thought, and that was part of the reason Jesus was rejected, because he didn't set up his kingdom then. Okay, all right, so now the Jews rebel against Rome in AD 66, and then in AD 70, of course, we know that the city was besieged, and it was almost completely annihilated, and all the people. And that was under the Roman Emperor Titus. All right, so he destroys the temple, just like Jesus said would happen. He said the temple would be destroyed and not one stone would be left upon another. All right, so are we getting kind of the resentment that the Jews have towards constantly being conquered, towards being having some resentment, right, towards these other countries and everything? And of course, the reason all that happened was because they didn't follow God. Had they followed him, had they did exactly what he said, they would have never been conquered. Okay, but they weren't doing what he said. All right. And but I want to say this, that gives us no license to hate them, to persecute them, to think badly of them. Okay? Because we are no better. It's only by the mercy and grace of Jesus Christ that we are where we are, and that we believe what we do and we live the lives that we live. All right, so we know that the people are rebelling. They want to get rid of Rome, and so now. Titus was a horrible dictator, okay? And so he tore down their temple. He expelled the Jews from Rome. See, this is another thing. When you start looking at the history of where they were dispersed to, okay, all over the world, well, now they start getting kicked out. See, Rome kicked them out. you know, and they start getting kicked out from other places. So literally their whole existence, okay, just like today with these horrible things going on today in our colleges and universities, these Jewish kids are not safe. And I see where people are going back to Israel, even though they're in war, they feel safer with their own people in the midst of war than they do in our colleges and universities.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It is, it's insane. So there was a large Jewish community in Rome proper, that had been dispersed there, and guess what? They were thriving, okay? And so then they get kicked out of Rome. And so Tiberius, unlike all his predecessors, they all tried to stamp out all foreign religions. It wasn't just the religion of the Jews, it was everybody. And so Tiberius was the emperor when Jesus was crucified. And then Titus was emperor when the temple was destroyed.
So is that why they kicked them out, is because of their religion?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the Jews, see, they weren't allowed to rebuild the temple, right, in AD 70. And then Titus imposed a tax on them to pay for the construction of a temple to Jupiter. So where the temple was, he put a temple to Jupiter there. No, wait, I don't think that's right. I think he put it in Rome. He put it in Rome, but he made the Jews pay for it. Okay? And then of course he killed many of them just to stamp out the religion. All right. So once again, there's rebellion, right? I mean, you got to stand up for yourself, right? You got to fight. So they rebelled. They're rising up. They're fighting against Rome, and yet the whole time they're prospering. All right, so then in 313 AD, Constantine and Licinius in the Edict of Milan gave official recognition to the now established religion of Christianity. You see how with every, one dictator dies and a new one comes, just like our president. You know, we were doing good under Trump. The morality of the United States was not like it is now. I mean, we were okay. I think we were okay during Trump. Biden gets in, a year, all hell broke loose. Morality has gone down the tubes. People are going nuts, losing their cotton-picking minds. So that's the way it always is. Those leaders come in and the nations just go bonkers according to whoever's in power. Okay, but now, Jesus has come and gone. He's died. He's resurrected. He's all that. Christianity's taken hold and everything. So now we've got a ruler who is recognizing Christianity. And so now it's being recognized as the most powerful religion on earth. And this is in the 4th century. So you would think, okay, well, things are getting better, right? Because now Christianity is a thing. It's been established. It's being accepted. Oh, no. Because you know good and well who's not going to put up with that, right? It's Satan. All right. So now the Jews are the target of yet another group. Who do you think targets the Jews now? The Christians. Now the Christians are coming against the Jews. All right. So now the Jews are victims of religious intolerance and political oppression. So Christian literature began to display extreme hostility towards Jews, which prompted violence. All right? And they burned their synagogues. They passed a law that there could be no intermarriages between Christians and Jews. They could no longer celebrate their commanded feast days. They later, under Emperor Constantine, they were forbidden to own Christian slaves. And no Christian could convert to Judaism. And their every move was monitored by Christians.
And who was this under?
This is in the 5th century, so it's under Rome.
Okay, still under Rome.
Yeah, still under Rome.
Define a Christian back then.
Well, that's the thing. Okay, you got to remember, so what other Christian religion out of Rome is really taking hold? Catholicism. All right, so then in 1096 AD, there was a German crusade which destroyed flourishing Jewish communities. And in France, the Jews were mercilessly killed, as well as in London and throughout England. And then in 1290, they banished all the English Jews, and then they banished them from France and Austria. I mean, can you imagine? You have nowhere to go. There's no country that will take you. All right, and then in the 14th century, this got really bad. In the 14th century, the Black Death plague swept across Europe, and they had to blame somebody, right, for the plague. So guess who they blamed? The Jews. And so the Jews absolutely had nothing to do with it, and they were getting the Black Plague too. It wasn't like they were, God spared them. No, they had it too. But rumors spread that it was the Jews' fault. And then 900 Jews were burned alive to pay for the Black Plague. 900 were burned alive. So Jews were tortured. They were tortured until they confessed to crimes that they didn't commit. So then we got the Middle Ages, and the Middle Ages spilled over into the 19th century, believe it or not. And the Jews were handicapped legally with restrictions. They were restricted in money lending. Nobody could lend money to them. Where and how many Jews could live in one area was restricted. So they were restricted as to where they could live, how many of them could live together, and that kind of thing. And this is where the word ghetto comes from, because the Jews had to live in ghettos. They had specific places they had to live, and only so many could live there, and things like that. So the Jews were not allowed to own any land. All right, and they had to pay special tax just to enter the city, and they had to swear oaths to even get in the city. All right, and they were forced to wear special clothing, such as a Jewish hat or a yellow badge that was sewn onto their clothes. Where do you think Hitler got the idea from? It wasn't new; it had already been done. And sometimes they had to wear special colored robes. They had to wear something to be identified as a Jew. They were limited in the occupations that they could go into. Their movements were restricted. And in fact, no Jews were known to be living in England until 1655, when Oliver Cromwell reversed the policies on the Jews. So they had all been killed or fled. And then guess what? It happened in Spain. And y'all probably know that story, because the Queen, I think it was Queen Isabella, I think that was her name. And it was the same year, 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And it was that same year that they expelled all the Jews from Spain. So this has been going on for, millennia. And so they were forced to convert to Catholicism, or they were expelled or killed. Now Germany did the same thing, and then at the beginning they let them leave, and they fled to Poland, Lithuania, and Hungary. All right, and then Hitler took over Poland and blah, blah, blah. But this is back when, this was back at the same time in 1492, that Germany, so Spain kicks them out of Spain, and then Germany kicks them out in 1492. Around that same area, they're kicked out of there too.
For the same reason.
For the same reason. All right, so now you got the Crusades. Now, we probably all heard of the Crusades, but we may not really know exactly what they were or what all that entails, and maybe because we don't know our history, or we not Catholic, so maybe that's not something but the Crusades are, they were the first SS, if you want to say that. And so the Crusades of Rome was a military campaign sanctioned by the Catholic Church at the end of the 11th century until the 13th century. So this wasn't just a couple of years thing. This was like a 300-year thing. All right? And where the Church of Rome set out to capture Jerusalem, which now has fallen into the hands of Muslims. All right, so you got Catholicism rising up as a religion, you got Islam rising up as a religion, you had Christianity rising up as a religion, and now Jerusalem's in the hand of the Muslims, and now the Catholics come in, and they're going to take it. All right, so this sparked a territorial war, and now Jews were attacked all over Germany, France, and England. Why? Because we see it today. In our colleges, they're rising up against Israel. It's just history repeating itself. And the Jews are not safe here. And if these schools don't do something, we're going to see some of these kids getting killed.
Because the Jews used to, this was a haven.
Yes,
for them,
but
right,
it's not
America.
anymore.
Yeah.
All right, so until this time, until all this, it just goes in waves, right? And until this time, the Jews were doing really well. And they're prospering. And they're causing Christian business leaders to be jealous of them. And that's what I want you to see. Do you see how everywhere they went, they prospered? Everywhere they went, they did well. Everywhere they went, they made money. That's the big joke, right? If you're Jewish, you're loaded, right? And because the Jews always prospered. Why? Because they're God's chosen people. Their very existence screams out that there is a God, even if they don't believe Him.
And it just gave all the other people reason to hate them even
Yes,
more.
they were jealous.
Yes.
And so the jealousy drove them to murder. All right, so this really, it's ridiculous. So the Jews were actually accused of drinking the blood of Christian children in mockery of the Christian Catholic Eucharist. And they were said, this became a big thing. I mean, people really, honest to goodness, believed that Jews did that. And they were said to have kidnapped a child that had not yet reached puberty and taken to a hidden place, and the child would be tortured by the Jews, possibly taken to the synagogue and engaged in a mock tribunal to try the child. Then the child would be presented to the tribunal naked and tied up and eventually be condemned to death. And in the end, the child would be crowned with thorns and tied or nailed to a wooden cross. And then the cross would be raised, and the blood dripping from the child's wounds would be caught in bowls or glasses and then drunk. All right, well, first of all, Jews would never drink blood. Okay, because blood is forbidden.
Yes.
All right, they would never do that. So you see how preposterous this is. And then finally, the child would be killed, and with a spear through the heart, sword, or dagger, its dead body would be removed from the cross and concealed or disposed. But in some instances, rituals of black magic would be performed on it. This went throughout the Christian world. Christians literally thought this is what Jews did. Well, A, they don't know the Word of God, because the fact that they would drink blood is preposterous. Okay? And so this is what really got people riled up. So there was no truth whatsoever in these accusations, but these rumors started going around. They started printing materials, showing this stuff, telling this stuff, handing these pamphlets out to everybody. And then what? Guess what? Then they started getting blamed for killing Jesus. All right, and so then this thirst for innocent, pure blood at the expense of innocent Christian children began to be the thing. Okay, and so they wanted them killed, they wanted them dead. So not only were the Jews in this tiny nation dealing with the crusades of the European nations, but they were also dealing with the uprising of the Muslims. All right, at the same time. And the Muslim nations stretched from Egypt to Syria to Iraq, and this was a new religion, and at first they did form alliances with the Jews. But then things went south, of course, because they're just diametrically opposed. And then after this, Muhammad, he's still alive, in the Quran, he instructs his followers to change their direction of prayer from Jerusalem to Mecca. When things go south and he's not getting along with the Jews. Now he tells them to face faced their prayers towards Mecca instead of Jerusalem. And then after that, it all went to pot, and then after that, it never returned, and they've been at war ever since. All right, so now let's fast forward to Hitler. Well, as you can now see, Jew hatred is not a new thing. And Hitler's Europe had a history of Jew hatred. And Hitler grew up in Austria. Austria had a history of Jew hatred and discrimination and persecution. So Christians saw the Jewish faith as an aberration that had to be squashed. And so this notion in Hitler's youth was that even though Jews had converted to Christianity or Catholicism, that they were still viewed as different because of their bloodline. So Hitler didn't come up with this himself. This is something he knew. This is something he grew up with. This is something that was all over Europe. And so then another influence on Hitler was the German national, whose name was George Ritter von Schonauer. He was a German nationalist that Hitler admired. And he espoused to the fact that Jews could never be fully fledged German citizens. You know what? This is why I say we have to talk to our kids and our grandkids. We have to talk about this stuff because they're getting ideas from the colleges and the universities, and they're getting polluted. Their minds are being polluted. Their minds are being deceived, just like Hitler's was. Do you think Hitler's mother thought that he was going to be the dictator and kill 6 million Jews? I mean, nobody thinks their kid is going to do that. You know what? We don't know what our kid is capable of, good or bad. And if you keep your mouth zipped shut and you don't say anything, it's your fault if your kid goes astray because you didn't talk to them. That is our responsibility as parents. And we have to prepare them for this evil world, and we have to prepare them for what is going to bombard them. So here we go. So Hitler, he's a phenomenal painter. I looked at some of his pictures that he painted. He's phenomenal. They're still in existence today, and they're phenomenal. And yet he did not get admitted to that art school that he wanted to go to, and I don't know why, because he was really a phenomenal painter. And had he gotten admitted to that art school, might that have changed the whole course of his life, And but anyway, so he starts he ain't no dummy. He's a smart man. And he starts following these political leaders, and then he, gets into politics and stuff, and then, of course, the rest is history. But they believe that many of his ideas came from this German politician who was a diehard Catholic and an anti-Semite. All right? And so the German guy, he blamed the successful Jews for the plight of the more common man. What do you call that? Jealousy.
Yeah. Like they blame the rich here for all our
Yes.
problems. Yeah.
So they blamed the Jews. All right, and so that spilled over into Hitler, and so Hitler was really a byproduct of an anti-Semite society and politicians. And then we have the politician in France who founded the Anti-Semitic League of France. France was horribly against the Jews. Now, as early as August of 1920, Hitler compared the Jews to germs. Well, now where do we heard that before? The Black Plague. Essentially that's what he's saying. See, all this stuff he knows all this stuff. He knows the history. And so now he's comparing it to germs, and he stated that disease cannot be controlled unless you destroy their causes. So the influence of Jews would never disappear without removing its cause, the Jew from our midst, is what Hitler said. So these radical ideas paved the way for the mass murder of the Jews in the 40s. And according to Hitler, the Jews were after world domination.
Okay.
So I want you to see, it's just over and over and over again. You see them prospering, and you see the rest of the world getting jealous and hating them because they're prospering. Instead of looking at them and saying, wow, I want what you got. Tell me what you got, And so they would not hesitate to use all possible means, including capitalism. And in this, that's what Hitler was saying. And in this way, Hitler took advantage of the existing prejudice that linked Jews to monetary power and financial gain. So he just further spread the lie, all right? And then he held that communism was a Jewish conspiracy. And as the larger part of the communist leaders were not Jewish, now a few were, but most of them were not Jewish. But so there was only a small portion of Jews that were communists, most of them weren't. But he started spreading that lie, that all the Jews were communists, all right? And so at first the Nazis began growing in power and influence, and then the German Jews didn't even oppose them. And I'm sure they're just so used to persecution. They could have never dreamed that what was about to happen, right? So at first they didn't even oppose them. And then the violence ramped up, the persecution, the harassment, the oppression, it just got worse and worse. And so then the Nazis defined the Jews by race and not religion. See, they got off of their religion, and now they focused on the bloodline and their race. And they were from Shem and not Japheth. They were not Aryan race, but they were this Jewish race. And so then they began to claim that all races other than the Aryan race from Japheth was inferior. And then the Nazi definition of Jews included people who, if you were disabled, if you were black, if you were Asian, if you were anything other than Aryan, they thought you were inferior and should be killed. So Hitler and the Nazis claimed that the Jewish race was especially dangerous, though, okay, because they supposedly exploited and harmed other races. So the Nazis referred to Jews as a parasitic race. And in particularly, they believed that Jews were parasites that were destroying their own Aryan race. So this is just hogwash. And this is just false and prejudiced belief that they just, for whatever reason, which we know was Satan, put that in their heads and to destroy God's people. And so they wanted to literally get all the Jews out of Germany to keep from destroying their race. And so, and then we know the rest of the story. So there were laws that also banned so-called race mixing. In addition, the Nazis carried out forced sterilizations. We know about that of certain groups that they considered to be inferior. They sterilized black people. They sterilized anybody with a handicap, anybody that wasn't Aryan or what they perceived to be perfection. And I really don't recall ever hearing much about black people in Germany, do you? When you hear about the Holocaust and stuff, and you don't ever see pictures of black people or anything. Well, there were black people in Germany. And they really don't know how many because they said there was never a census taken. Now, I have heard of gypsies. Gypsies lived in Germany and they were targeted, all right, and they were killed. And but I never had really heard anything about black people. So when the Nazis came to power in 1933, and of course I read from 1,000 to 100,000, black people. They don't know. They really don't know. But the Nazi regime immediately began to harass and persecute the black people. And they called them racially inferior. And many black people were murdered, imprisoned, and forcibly sterilized. All right, so if we fast forward today, and let's see where we are. Well, first of all, from what we learned from our giant study, there's nothing new. It's just the same old. And it's just history repeating itself. And as far as the persecution or the rivalry between Islamists, which is referred to as anti-Semitism, can you believe that they still tell those same old lies about Jews on Arab TV? The same ones that Luther told, the same ones that Hitler told. They're still telling those same ridiculous things about the children and all that. They're telling that on Arab TV. They pump this into these little toddlers. They teach them to hate from the time before they can even speak. They teach them to hate the Jews. And so they call it blood libel. And they actually tell on Arab TV that the Jews are kidnapping little children and spilling their blood and killing them. And they're doing this today. So in English-speaking countries for a long time, it's been a law, especially in the United States and Britain, that anti-Semitism and prejudice was illegal. And that's why so many Jews came here. And Canada adopted that law, Australia adopted it, South Africa and New Zealand. Ireland had a very low rate of anti-Semitism as well in modern times. But in Quebec, in Canada, this is really interesting. Now, when we went, pretty much everybody spoke French. I mean, all the signs are in French, everything is in French. But in Quebec, do you know they have a high rate of anti-Semitism in Quebec? Why? Because France was anti-Semitic. France kicked out the Jews. So even today, today's Quebec in Canada is full of anti-Semitism because that goes back to their history. All right, and they were extremely hostile to the Jews, and that goes back to France was Catholic. So the Catholic Church has a high degree of anti-Semitism, and they were responsible for the Crusades. So now today, after October 7th, there's been a mass resurgence of Jew hatred. And I see it, and I'm like, I don't understand it. We've even had somebody come to church here. They didn't stay, but they were Jew haters. And we told them, you cannot be a Christian and hate them. I'm sorry. You're going to, Jesus is Jewish, and he's going to rule and reign from Jerusalem. There ain't no, those two don't mix. Hatred for Jews and being a Christian, that's just not mixed. And so I've been thinking about this, and I don't understand where all this Jew hatred is coming from. And but guess what? Many Americans have conceded to the left's dogma. Biden ain't no Jew lover. He's not for Biden. He's not for Jerusalem. And so so what Americans are doing is they're taking sides with this dogma. And the crazy thing is, these kids are out there spouting diversity and equality and inclusion and spouting all this kind of stuff and love more, war less, and all that stuff. And at the same time, out of the other side of their mouth, they're talking about killing people. So it's okay to kill babies, it's okay to kill Jews, but don't kill, don't even talk about a homosexual or transgender, and I'm not saying anything against, I'm just saying that's what they say. Let's love the homosexual, let's love the transgender, let's love the lesbian, let's love whatever, but let's kill the Jews and the babies.
Yeah.
I say don't kill anybody.
Yeah.
Let's love everybody. Yeah. It just makes no sense. And so now they're out there persecuting, they're protesting, they're calling for the literal destruction of a whole race of people. These kids are holding up signs, they're being arrested for saying from the river to the sea, to kill them from the river to the sea, to wipe them out. So it's just preposterous, and they're focusing on they're literally focusing on uplifting one race of people, the Palestinians, over the Jews, when they're at the same time out of the other side of their mouth, calling for equality and being tolerant of all these other people and these other crazy things that they're doing. It just absolutely makes no sense. Oh gosh.
What are the schools doing about it?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Well, they've closed down schools, they've done online, things to try to keep the kids safe. They did arrest, at Yale the other day, they arrested like 50 students. And of course, all the ones that are getting arrested are just like heroes to the rest. They're just applauding, and I am going to tell you about this in a minute, but a lot of it is the faculty. The faculty is anti-Semitic. They're against the Jews. So they're part of all this. So if you think this is new to America, I want you to see this has just been going on since Satan put the giants in the land. That's when it started. And so it's always been here. It's always going to be here. And if you remember where we all came from, we came from Europe. All right. And so guess what? There was Jew hatred all over Europe. And then here in the United States, then some of the churches picked that up, such as the Lutheran Church. All right. The Lutheran Church is anti-Semitic. The Presbyterians are anti-Semitic. And they believe in replacement theology. All right, so I want to talk to you for just a few minutes about replacement theology. So it's practiced more than you know. And I guarantee you, you've got family and friends who are practicing replacement theology, especially if they're in one of those churches. And it's an ancient philosophy that goes way back, okay, to Europe. And it was their fix, the Christian fix to the Jew problem. And it can be traced back to our earliest church fathers, those that founded our well-known mainline denominations today. And they said it's even a well-known topic taught in most of our seminaries today. All right, and so if you're not aware of replacement theology, then it's time you know, because replacement theology is simply the teaching that the church, born in the book of Acts on the day of Pentecost, has replaced Israel as a nation and a people. All right? And so the older word for the same ideology is called supersessionalism. And it just means that the church has superseded Israel. All right, so adherents to this theology believe that God has set aside Israel and made the church the new Israel. And the church makes up a new and improved people of God. So we've just replaced Israel. All right? And so you've heard Pastor tell about that time some years ago. We went to a Christmas party that one of James and Robbie's friends, his mother invited us to her Christmas party. So we went over to her house, and they're Presbyterian. And so her Presbyterian retired pastor was there. And so she introduced Jeff, oh, he's a pastor, and this is our Presbyterian pastor, blah, blah, blah. So they began to talk. Well, it went south fast. And it got violent fast. That man was from Satan himself. He was so anti-Semitic. He was so all about that the church had replaced Israel, and Jeff was standing up against that. And you can't call yourself a Christian and believe that, that man, and he was older than Jeff, like 10 years older. I thought he was going to hit him. I really did. And it got really bad. And it was all because that man believes in replacement theology. And so vehemently that he was spitting bullets. I mean, he got right up in Jeff's face. I really thought, no joke, I was waiting any minute for him to hit him. And so we've got to guard ourselves against this. Listen, non-denominational churches believe this. So when you go, I don't care if you're Baptist, Methodist, non-denominational, Presbyterian, Lutheran, you need to find out what that church believes. And if they believe that any church, the Christians, have replaced Israel, you need to hightail it out of there, because you are on Satan's ground.
That was the last thing I asked Pastor before I decided to come here. What is your view on that?
Yes.
He said it's from the very pit of hell.
Yes, and
that's
it
my
is.
church.
And it is.
Yeah.
So the teaching goes like this. Well, Israel's role as the people of God was completed. So yeah, God called them, but their role is completed. So once the Messiah came 2,000 years ago, Israel's mission was done. And a transition occurred at that point, and the church took over as the people of God and became the focal point for the outworking of God's plan and purpose in redemption. God is no longer working through ethnic Israel, and this view is called Ionic supersessionalism. And then number 2, they say Israel's place as the people of God was forfeited. it was forfeited, or other more staunch replacement theologians say that Israel came under divine judgment by God on their nation for their rejection of the Messiah. And this is called punitive supersessionalism. All right, now we all know Martin Luther. Martin Luther was the father of the Lutheran Church. He was Catholic. He was the one he did get a revelation, a true revelation, that it wasn't by works, but it was by faith that we're saved. But listen to what he said. He says, "For such ruthless wrath of God is sufficient evidence that they, i.e. the Jewish people, assuredly have erred and gone astray. Even a child can comprehend this. For one dare not regard God as so cruel that he would punish his own people so long, so terribly, so unmercifully. Therefore, this work of wrath is proof that the Jews, surely rejected by God, are no longer his people, and neither is he any longer their God." Now, he published a lot of publications. He printed publications and handed them out when he was living that have survived to today, and Hitler used a bunch of them. Now, I have a real problem. Yes, he got a revelation that is by faith and not works, but I don't see how you can be saved and believe this. I mean, you were basically just throwing away the whole Bible. So Martin Luther, he was Roman Catholic. He was he produced these horrific things and pamphlets and stuff. And in fact, a mere 50 years ago, after the last book of the or 50 years after Jesus, when the last book of the New Testament was written, Gentile Christians had already come to believe that their church had replaced the Jewish people. Just a mere 50 years after the last book of the New Testament was written, they were already believing this. And they believed that the Jewish people were no longer a part of God's program. So I'd be remiss to point out that the earliest believers were Jewish. The church started with the Jews. Okay, there are still Jewish believers today, and not all the Jews are responsible for the killing of Jesus. Okay, and so that's just absolutely ridiculous. And there's a number of Jewish believers, you know, have always been in existence, but Gentile believers began to outnumber the Jewish believers. All right, and that's where the problem started. And then Rome destroying the temple, and then the Jewish, you know, believers were forced to flee. And then so what happened was there was nobody left but Gentiles. All right, and I'm telling you, I've known very few Jewish people in my life. I went to school with one. I had no idea what a Jew was. I just felt sorry for him because he didn't celebrate Christmas. And I knew one in business. And I got to be friends with him, but those are only two that I know of, that I know were Jewish. Yeah. And I'm about to be 61, and those are the only two Jews I can ever think of I've ever known in my life. So you can see where this, you know, if you don't know somebody, or you know, whatever, you'll maybe start to, you know, think differently. Praise God, I don't. But anyway, so as the Gentiles began to be more and more Gentile believers, and the Jews are still being persecuted, they're still being you know, killed and all this stuff. Then the Gentiles started seeing, oh, well, they're being judged by God. You see where all this is going? And especially when they continued to be blessed, you know, no matter where they were still blessed. Then, and yet now the jealousy comes in. So it's just this ridiculous stuff going over and over again. So then you got your Gentile leaders beginning to come out against the Jewish plan and against God's plan. And next thing you know, they've just come up with these philosophical ideas that God has judged them, and they're no longer his, and so we just reject them. So the early church read the promises of God to Israel and ignored them. So you think, well, oh my gosh, it's all through here. See, well, how am I a Christian and read that? No, they just ignored it. Just ignored it. Or just philosophized it away, and then they began to superimpose their own beliefs onto the Bible. And then they taught their parishioners that. That's why I'm telling you to run from any church that believes that. Because that spirit is a false, lying spirit, and it is going to get on you. And so this is key. Now listen to this. This is going on today in churches. They spiritualize Israel. All right? And it's being done all across America and the world. And what they do is this method of interpretation. I can think of somebody I know right off the bat who came from a Presbyterian church, and his whole philosophy is spiritualizing Israel. All right? And so they spiritualize Israel. They replace Israel. They replace the church as God's beneficiary of His unfulfilled promises. And then replace, Israel with the church. Now I want to read you an example called the Epistle of Barnabas. Now this shows you how far back this goes. And this was written around AD 100. The Epistle of Barnabas. He says, "Take heed now to yourselves, and not be like some, adding largely to your sins, and say, the covenant is both theirs and ours, but they thus finally lost it." So talking about the Jews having no further claim to God's promises, and in spite of the fact that they're all through the Bible. But see, they take the liberty of spiritualizing, saying where Israel is mentioned, God just changed His mind. And now it's the church. That's preposterous. All right? And so the Catholic Church has lightened its stance on a lot of this, and now they see themselves as co-inheritors of God's promises, as some of the other churches have maybe lightened up some of that. And the Catholic Church sees themselves as not only the inheritors of God's promise, but also as the true and only church. All right, so before you go and affiliate with any church, you better do like Mary Ann, and you better ask some questions and find out what they really believe, because you will be putting yourself under demonic spirits that are going to have an impact on you. So I want to ask you, could all this possibly be contributing to the current state of affairs that we find ourselves in after October the 7th? Listen, if you don't think you're involved, honey, you are. Because guess what? Everything that goes over there affects us here. It affects every time you go to the grocery store, every time you go to the gas station, everything you do is affected by what's going on over there. So we are just as involved as if we were there. All right? And then again, who can understand these young people? They haven't lived long enough to know squat, and they're out there, going to change the world. And they're wrong. And so we've got to stand up against this. And they are supporting known terrorists. Now, they fight for the lives of homosexuals and for them to be treated kindly, which they should be. So I'm not saying that. But they fight for this group over here, and then they support terrorists who murdered babies, put a baby in a microwave and killed it, killed women and children that did nothing, and it's okay to do that. Do you see that this is a spirit? This is a demonic spirit. Those women were raped and then murdered. And these young people are out there going to jail and fighting for those terrorists. Oh, gosh. Oh, they stand up for Black Lives Matter. Well, how about White Lives Matter? How about Asian Lives Matter? How about, Indian Lives Matter? And yet they're still, Black Lives Matter, but it's okay to put a baby in a microwave and kill it. See, when things don't make sense, you know that it's from Satan. And none of this is from God. So, I found out, according to the Heritage Foundation, they said that one reason that the problem is so prevalent on college campuses is because each campus has an office of DEI, which is called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And that office focuses on political activism. And believe it or not, a lot of it is focused on Israel and the Jews, and they're supposed to be focused on human rights overall. But according to Heritage Foundation, they said that the majority of them have shifted their focus from hatred of Israel to the hatred of Israel and activity espousing their views on campus and encouraging others to do the same. And guess what? If you apply to a college, you have to be accepted. And they have to know all about you. They know your race, they know your religion, they know your background, they know your grades, they know where you go to school, they know where you go to church, they know who your family is. And so the colleges have to accept you. So these kids that they're accepting, they know who they're getting. It's not like they don't know that they're getting Islamic kids or kids that are, they know exactly who these kids are. And they're taking them in. And I found this quote by, did you know that Mel Gibson, everybody saw The Passion of the Christ, right? Did you know that Mel Gibson is Catholic? Did you know that he's anti-Semitic? Okay, would you really think about it? He makes a movie about killing Jesus. Does that not make sense? Okay, and so he said that Jews are responsible for all the wars in the world. So there was an underlying motivation in him making that movie. See, we got to check our motives, all right? And then I read about a man, and I never read these books, praise God, I never really knew about it because I read a ton to James Robbie. But his name is Ronald Dahl, and he was a famous children's book author. And some of them you're going to know. Matilda, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where the movie came from, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach. I've heard of those, but I never read them to my kids. Well, anyway, he was a big replacement theology person. He was a big anti-Semite. And they said that he actually put stuff in these children's books. So I think God just kept us away from those because I read a lot to them. And so he said, that's what he said. He said, I think replacement theology is growing because of what's coming out of seminaries. Those who are graduating know very little of the Bible. They grew up in churches that didn't teach the Bible. Sadly, what I'm seeing in churches is the Bible is being taught less and less. And I know that sounds controversial, but he's for replacement theology. And he's saying it's going on because, which is all true, because the churches don't teach the Bible, the seminaries aren't teaching the Bible, and so he's saying it's taking hold, but he thinks that's a good thing. So in closing, I want you to pay attention to Harvard and Yale, especially on the news, and all these other colleges and universities who even as of yesterday were just having horrible violent protests. Columbia University, they told all their Jewish students not to look Jewish because they're in danger. And they even held, online classes because about 100 students were chanting not only death to the Jews, but death to America. You see what I'm saying? They know who these kids are, and they're not doing anything about it. And some of the staff was out there among the students protesting. Now, is that where you want your kid to go to school? How important is a Yale or Harvard or Columbia education? We're sending our kids to hell by sending them to these schools. And it's not worth it. So the UN recognized Israel, but the people didn't recognize Israel, and immediately, they went to war, and I'm talking about 1948. And it's interesting that Lebanon, they were at peace with Israel. And the people, Robbie's got a friend who's from Lebanon, and Robbie says he's a great guy and everything. And so everybody in Lebanon lived in peace with Israel until the PLO went in and took over Lebanon. Turkey. See, people couldn't understand because the Bible says that Turkey is going to turn on Israel. Well, up until, not too long ago, Turkey was friends with Israel until Erdogan came in. So you see how with every president, things change, with every political leader, things change, it's just this vicious cycle, right? And then Israel gave up Gaza in 2005, trying to make peace. And they made all the Israelites move out of Gaza. And they said, okay, here, we're gonna make peace. We don't wanna fight with you. Here, you take Gaza. And they did, and the Gaza people had complete freedom. They governed themselves, and what did they do? They elected Hamas. They deliberately chose terrorists to lead their nation. And then guess what? Hamas was, they became dictators. They were a terrorist organization, or they are. But these people made their choice. This is what they wanted. So the Palestinians don't honor international law. These students aren't honoring international law. What I'm saying is the UN, and of course the UN doesn't either, but they did recognize Israel as a nation. And so no, this is just complete lawlessness. All right, and so they're calling for genocide. These students, these faculty and others, they're calling for Palestine to be free from the river to the sea. They're literally calling for the death of these people. And do you realize how teeny tiny Israel is?
Yeah.
The Middle East is gargantuous, and you got this little tiny speck of land the size of New Jersey. Why can't those people live in that little tiny piece of land in peace when the Palestinians have all this land? And see, the crazy thing is, the Middle East doesn't want the Gazans. They don't want those people. Egypt won't take them. Jordan won't take them. Nobody will take them. Because they're terrorists. They're terrible.
Yeah, they're scared of it.
But it makes no sense when you got all this land mass and you got this little speck of people and you can't let them just live in peace.
Yeah.
So in closing, Jordan, Syria, Gaza, Ramallah, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, if you go there as a Jew, you will be killed. Can you imagine thinking, I'm going to get on a plane and I'm going to go to this country and I'll be safe? No, you will die. You cannot be Jewish and live in any of these countries. And so again, why can't they just live in peace in that one little speck of land? And it just makes no sense. So when it makes no sense, either God is really doing some miraculous miracle that defies logic, or it is of Satan. Because most of the time, he makes no sense. So let's pray every day for the peace of Jerusalem. Let's pray for these people. The Bible says that they're blind. We have no right to hate them. They are God's chosen people. They brought us the Bible. They brought us Jesus. They're going to bring us the millennial kingdom. They're going to be the greatest evangelists that have ever walked the face of the earth. God is not done with them. And we have plenty of proof of that, and especially in 1948 when they became a nation again. And I really feel strongly that if we're not praying for them, we're not doing what we're supposed to do.
That's right.
Because can you imagine if any one of us was in that position? And can you imagine being out on your balcony and bombs, flying over your apartment building? I mean, what they're going through is just, none of us can imagine it.
No.
So we need to pray for them. We need to support them. We need to do whatever we can, whatever opportunity arises that you feel like, the Lord's called you to. But the bottom line is we need to pray for them. And we need to pray that Jesus comes soon. And they are going to wake up. And they are going to accept him as the Messiah. And they are going to come around. And it's going to be exciting. So don't hate them because they're blind. Let's love them.
Yeah.
And let's love them into the kingdom. And yes, I'm thankful that I don't have to, face all that. But we need to keep in mind, well, what if that was me?
Yeah. Amen.
So bless y'all. I hope you learned something, and I hope it'll change our attitudes, and I hope we'll pray for these college kids. because they're in sad shape and they're on their way to hell. So pray for them. And stay away from replacement theology churches and any ministry